I'm pleased to have a very notable guest, and also the first episode of Plienas and Šienas in English, so hopefully it will be understandable. With me here I have George Weigel. Among other things, he's a biographer of Karol Wojtyla, more well known as Pope Saint John Paul II. It's quite a mouthful. And without getting into much introductions, I'd like just to ask a first question of you. What do you make of the Pope's legacy, especially when it comes to church and world politics and the relations of today, mostly, and that can be everywhere from geopolitics to culture and things of that sort? What's his legacy?
I think the enduring legacy of John Paul II was to demonstrate how aroused consciences, how human aspirations for genuinely good political ends can bend the course of history in a more humane direction. Communism would have collapsed at some point in history because of its own implausibility.
Yep. But
the reason why communism collapsed in 1989 to 91 rather than in 1999 or 2009 or 2019 was in no small part due to the fact that John Paul II helped ignite a revolution of conscience in Central and Eastern Europe in the late 1970s that then played itself out in Central and Eastern Europe in movements like Solidarity in Poland, Charter 77 in Czechoslovakia, Sojus in Lithuania. And these movements created a new kind of politics. They created a politics of conscience. And conscience aroused creates a form of power that communism simply couldn't match.
Yeah.
And you don't get any of that, I don't think, at least in the degree to which we experienced it in the 1980s without John Paul II.
Mm-hmm. Maybe some people would object to it and say that maybe we're giving too much credit to the Catholic Church or to Karol in that sense, but I'm sure as you've seen all these things unfold right closely, you would object to it as well, right?
No, I think some people just can't wrap their heads around the idea that a religious leader has an impact on world affairs. But that's their problem. That's
I'm sure the Soviets did as well.
Well, no, actually, that's not true, because within weeks of the election of John Paul II, the KGB was planning ways and means to impede his work. The two people who immediately, like within a week, understood what the election of a Polish pope meant were Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who on the day of the pope's election told his housekeeper, who later told me, "This is the greatest thing to happen since World War I. It will change everything." That's Solzhenitsyn the day of the pope's election. And the other guy was Yuri Andropov, the head of the KGB, who was the most intelligent, cunning, devious of the Soviet leadership at that time. And he knew that this was not just a threat to the Soviet position in Poland, but within the Soviet Union itself, and specifically to Lithuania and Ukraine.
So it's not beyond exaggeration to say that it was a huge moment in the liberating of a continent, especially his election.
No one knew on October 16th, 1978, what would unfold over the next 11 years, or at least in precise detail. But that you had, and I should say, he was not elected because the College of Cardinals thought this man will bring down communism. He was elected because they thought he was an able churchman who would restore some stability and direction to the Catholic Church. But the fact of a pope who had a living experience of contesting with communism for the human future and, in effect, challenging communism on its own ideological grounds. Who has the nobler view of the human person? Mm-hmm. Who has the nobler view of human destiny? If you had any sense at all in 1978, you must have known that was going to make some kind of difference.
Yeah. As I mentioned, the movie Liberating a Continent, one of the last scenes of it takes place in 2013-2014 during the Maidan Revolution in Kiev, Ukraine. Why? Because I'm sure you also had a part in the production of that movie, and in those days, JPII has been dead for almost a decade, but still, his influence was palpable. I'm sure. Why was it the case?
I actually did not have anything to do with designing the movie. I mean, I'm a talking head of the movie on many occasions, but I think that was a very wise decision, because what the Maidan in 2013-2014 represented was very similar to what happened in the Gdansk shipyards in August and September of 1980, what happened in Prague in November and December of 1989, what happened in Lithuania in the period 89 to 90, 91. And that was what I called a moment ago aroused consciences. People saying, I'm not going to live this way anymore because this is not the right way to live.
Yeah. Would you agree that the current pontificate, which we're already getting into some muddy waters, lacks the heroism of the JPII era down here? And if so, what should be the response of the ordinary people?
I think the present foreign policy, so to speak, of the Vatican is ill-conceived. Mm-hmm. There has been a return to the kind of accommodation, negotiation approach to dealing with authoritarian and totalitarian regimes that was the Vatican policy before John Paul II. Mm-hmm. This was known then as the Ostpolitik. Mm-hmm. And it was premised on the idea that you can, in fact, make reasonable deals, agreements, with totalitarian regimes. And I don't think that's the case. The present Vatican policy in China is a serious mistake. A, because the Chinese regime will not honor whatever agreements it signs, but B, because it's evangelically counterproductive. It does not advance the cause of the gospel in China. I've written for years that whenever communism eventually collapses in China, which it will at some point, these things never last forever, China will be the greatest field of Christian mission since the Europeans came to the Western Hemisphere in the 16th century. Be an enormous opportunity for Christian mission in China, in a post-communist China. The Christian communities that will have what economists would call comparative advantage are not going to be the Christian communities that were entangled with the old regime.
Yeah.
So my fundamental problem with the present Vatican China policy is that it's short-sighted, and it is based, as I said at the beginning, on a premise that I do not accept, namely Chinese communists will keep their word. They haven't so far.
It's very interesting that you mentioned China, because do you also think that in Russia, post-current regime change, it's also a place for evangelization, or is it only the case that since Christianity is at least culturally very ingrained into the Russian mind, but also the political sphere, it's not really the case.
I think Russian culture as a whole suffered enormous damage during the communist period from 1917 to 1991. In our seminar here in Krakow, I told the story of this young man, Russian, highly intelligent, taking me through one of the great churches in the Kremlin in 1990, and we come up a stone staircase, and there's this beautifully restored late medieval fresco of the Last Supper. And this young man says to me, in all sincerity, please tell me, who are those men and what are they doing?
Yeah.
Now, he had been culturally decapitated, you know? You don't recognize one of the three great icons of Christian art. I mean, you got crucifixion, the Nativity, and the Last Supper. You have been deprived of your culture. So there's a huge problem of cultural destruction in Russia. The war in Ukraine has demonstrated how thoroughly corrupt the leadership of the Russian Orthodox Church is. I mean, Putin really has been, Patriarch Kirill has really been what Pope Francis told him not to be, Putin's altar boy.
Yeah.
Now, I think there is probably genuine faith in Russia, but it's not going to. You're not going to find it in Moscow and St. Petersburg. You're going to find it out in the country. Now, whether that kind of simple Christian faith has the capacity to reform a corrupted Russian Orthodox Church, I don't know. But I do think that one of the big losers already, now we're 5 months into the war in Ukraine when you and I are speaking, one of the big losers in this is the leadership of Russian Orthodoxy.
How long do you think the church was corrupted in Russia?
Well, the leadership has been corrupted since the Second World War. I mean, when Stalin decided in 1942-43 that he needed the church to help animate the Great Patriotic War, from that point on, the leadership of Russian Orthodoxy has been owned by the Russian state. I am absolutely convinced that the current patriarch was allied to the KGB as a young priest. His predecessor, there is no question because it's documented, Patriarch Alexei, was a KGB colonel, part of the apparatus. So that corruption is long-standing. Now, somehow it also produced, that church produced some serious Christian thinkers. There's a Russian Orthodox priest who broke with the Patriarchate of Moscow, who's a friend of mine, Cyril Hoveroon. He's now under the jurisdiction of the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople. He has forthrightly and courageously challenged this corruption, called for a new Russian Orthodox theory of church and state, which would actually learn something from the Catholic Church. Now, that's only one man, but that's perhaps an important sign of the future.
Yeah, because lots of people in Lithuania would think that the real corruption, well, maybe not the corruption, but being in a very close relationship between the Orthodox Church and the Russian state government was happening way before the Bolsheviks even came in with the Tsars.
That is absolutely true.
So maybe that's also the reason why there's
that's why there's no theory of church and state other than this strange notion of a symphony of church and state, which always means the subordination of the church to the state. Now, and that goes back to the Middle Ages. I mean, that's very deep. It's just wrong. I mean, I think at some point, you have to concede that what in Western Christianity was called Caesaropapism is a bad idea. This just never works.
Yeah. Do you think there's any reconciliation to be done there on that side, or it's just so heavily ingrained in the Russian culture that it's...
It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time. But
you're
if
optimistic about
I'm not optimistic, I'm hopeful.
Okay.
But Russia has to lose this war.
Yeah.
If Russia loses the war in Ukraine, there may be an opening for reconsideration. Okay, how come we lost? Why did we lose? Why does everybody hate us? Maybe there will be some opportunity then for a reconstruction of Russian political culture, including religious culture.
Yeah. Do you think like this Pope or any future Pope will have a say in it, or is...
I don't think there's much that the Catholic Church can do except not make matters worse.
Yeah.
And to treat with Kirill as if he is a churchman in the sense that the Pope is a churchman is just to create a false picture of the reality of the situation. So I think that's a mistake. I don't think... I mean, there's now talk of the Pope meeting Kirill in Kazakhstan, of all places, sometime this fall. That is a very bad idea, and it shouldn't happen.
Why not?
Because it reinforces the false image of Kirill as a churchman. He's not a churchman. He's a politician.
Yeah. And do you think that the Pope is playing into his game in that way?
I don't think the Pope understands this. I just think he does not grasp the reality of the situation. Or if he does, maybe he believes he can somehow touch this man's heart, and maybe that's true, but that's a very big gamble.
Okay. So the current nuncius in Ukraine is Lithuanian, and he claims to be that the Vatican policy, or at least the messaging of it, is quite clear, that they're strongly condemning the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and they try to do as much as they can to bring about peace. Do you also have the same outlook on the game, or?
I think the Vatican. The Vatican is a building, so we shouldn't say the Vatican says, because buildings don't talk.
Usually, yeah.
The commentary from the Secretary of State of the Holy See has been better in the sense of more accurate.
Okay.
In the third, fourth, and fifth months of the war. It was not good in the first 2 months. But I think it is simply fanciful for Vatican officials to imagine that they have a potential role as a mediating force in this conflict. I mean, you still, just this week, the third week of July, you have the Vatican Foreign Minister, Archbishop Gallagher, saying, well, we haven't been asked to be a mediator, but we would be happy to.
Yeah.
That's just, first of all, it isn't going to happen. Secondly, I don't think the present cast of mind in Ukraine is such that they would trust the Vatican as a mediator. And the Russians would try to manipulate the Vatican as a mediator. So why are we even talking about Vatican mediation? And a mediation that leads to simply the status quo ante, the status quo as of February 24th, 2022, is not acceptable. You cannot destroy large swaths of a country the way the Russians have done. You cannot murder civilians within, in considerable numbers. You cannot kidnap and relocate tens of thousands of people, blow up hospitals, destroy schools, and then say, okay, we're going to go back to where we were at the starting line. That is not acceptable.
That would be a reasonable position, but like some people would claim the fact that it's not the realpolitik is something else that you
there's unrealistic realism. There's a form of realism that is unrealistic.
Yeah.
And if anyone thinks that a return to the situation on February 23rd, 2022 would create anything other than a pause, after which, in 6 months or a year or whatever, if Putin is still in power, he will try again, is living in a fantasy land.
Yeah.
And therefore, why give him that pause? And by the way, while the pause is going on, who's responsible for rebuilding Mariupol?
Yeah.
Who's responsible for justice in Bucha? And so forth and so on. I mean, this is, this is like saying, okay, if Hitler had agreed to stop in Poland on September 10th and go back to where things were on September 3rd, okay, then we can talk about the future. I mean, this is to misunderstand the nature of a totalitarian regime.
Yeah. Then, yeah, I guess that brings us to the final question that I wanted to ask, and getting back to JP2 and
Sure.
and his just relations with Lithuania. I'm sure that you could share some stories maybe that he thought about our current situation, about the situation in the end of the 20th century, but also about the current one. What do you think his concern would be nowadays? What would he tell? What would he advise to the nation of the Baltics, and specifically to Lithuanians?
Well, the first thing he would do, obviously, is to urge Lithuania to hold on to, cherish, and grow the Catholic faith that was so important in maintaining Lithuanian identity during the period of the Soviet occupation. Yeah. The Catholic Church in Lithuania, like the Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine, like the Catholic Church in Poland, was a kind of safe deposit box of national identity. And an instrument like the Chronicle of the Catholic Church in Lithuania was very important in maintaining the idea this is a real nation with its own culture, its own history. It has a right to an independent life. The church was very important in that. It wasn't just the Catholic Church. There were people of different perspectives involved in Sąjūdis and whatnot, but Sąjūdis was meeting in the basement of the cathedral in Vilnius. So, I mean, there was obviously some connection there. I think the other thing John Paul II would say to all of us today is the famous "be not afraid." You know, history can be bent in a more humane direction. But that requires courage, it requires sacrifice, and it requires truth-telling. I think the best thing the Catholic Church, and specifically the Holy See, the Vatican, can do in these situations of conflict is tell the truth. Because there is so much disinformation, propaganda, rubbish of one sort or another pouring out of Moscow and other places, that for the church to be a calm, steady truth teller, here's what's happening, here's who did what, is an enormous public service.
Yeah, I guess that's really hard to disagree in that sense. Thank you for the time you had spent with me. It was a great honor for me, and also I think a great privilege to my viewers. Do you have any final words or something to say?
I have a great affection for Lithuania. I spent a week there in Lithuania in 2013 to help mark the 20th anniversary of John Paul II's visit. Yeah. I was deeply moved by being able to go to Chalet and the Hill Crosses, and it was a great honor in the 1980s to be able to defend the people of the Chronicle, Father Tomkavicius, as he then was, Father Sferinskis, Sister Nihole. And I'm very grateful to God for giving me the opportunity to meet and work with and support people of that level of faith and integrity. So happy to be here.
I'm very happy to hear these words. Look forward to seeing you in Lithuania as well, maybe sometime by God's grace. And then, yeah, in any way, as I said, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And then,
Thank you.
And then if I had to...
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you around.
Good.
Once again.
Okay.